Hello, I'm MG and welcome to the sixth video of MLOps video series. So in this video, we are going to continue the CI pipeline that we already created in the previous videos. So we are going to see what are the other steps left and how can I start to actually talk with my Azure Machine Learning, which is in my Azure subscription, within the time that I'm in my Azure DevOps, which is an agent running and also can authenticate and integrate to those services that I have in my subscription. So let's see how we can do that. Welcome back to the MLOps video series. So in the previous video, we started to create our first CI pipeline. We passed the unit test and it sounds that, well, the data and the code that we have with the new version of the code that our data scientist did a pull request and got to the master branch is already fine and passed the unit test. So now we can start actually interactively work with Azure Machine Learning from DevOps to create a compute cluster, do the training, upload the data, and then train the model. So, but before doing that, we need to authenticate from our Azure DevOps, which is an agent running my pipeline, which is here, to my Azure Machine Learning, which is here. Remember we did something similar for subscription. We connected our Azure DevOps to our subscription. Let me show you again. So in the project setting, where's the service connection? That's here. And here is already I have created a kind of connection to my Azure subscription. So whenever I'm in my pipeline in Azure DevOps that has an agent running my pipeline, that agent can connect to my Azure subscription using the credentials that I have within this connection that I've created. So now I have my Azure Machine Learning, and now let's create a new connection for connecting my DevOps to Azure Machine Learning that we created, and it's empty for now. So let's create a new service connection. And remember, we chose a name for that in variable groups. So click on Azure Resource Manager, again, automatic. Create a machine learning workspace, scope level, and subscription MG, my resource group, the same one that we created the machine learning inside, and that's the name we chose in the variable. And then that's the machine learning workspace that we have. And the service connection name, the same thing that we created in the variable group that I'm going to show you again. We are done and grant access to all pipelines. Click on save. It will shortly show another connection beside the one that we had for connecting to Azure subscription. Perfect, that's already been created here. And remember, this name AML Workspace connection should be familiar with you. Where, well, inside pipeline, library, in the variable group, remember we did this in the initial videos. And this is the name that we define for connecting to our workspace. And that's why we define it here. So when we have a pipeline and our pipeline need to connect to Azure Machine Learning, we're gonna tell that this is the connection you need to use through that variable we're defining. And what is that connection name? Well, we have already defined it here. That's already inside the service connection, the same name. Awesome. So now we are ready to interactively work with our Azure Machine Learning through my CI pipeline. So let's continue that. I'm gonna click on edit and we should see the task that we created, and we're gonna continue the rest. So what is the next task that we're gonna do? Well, I mentioned you that we want to do some interactive work with Azure Machine Learning. So we need to connect to that. Although we have created a connection, but I need a coding way to connect to my Azure Machine Learning. Let's say I wanna create a new compute, let's say here. So Azure DevOps is not a human to come use a mouse and click on new and create a new compute. So there should be a way that I can code this process. And the answer is yes, there is. There is Azure ML CLI that can be a terminal-based command tool that I can write down a code to say that, hey, go to this Azure Machine Learning and create a compute and name it as this, and start, for example, running that or install this kind of stuff in this compute. That's what we can code in my Azure DevOps because we want to make these steps all automated, right? But in order to let you know and make it more tangible that what is exactly Azure ML CLI, let's go to the portal. Okay, so I'm gonna open my Azure subscription or Azure portal. And as you can see here, I can have a cloud shell. So you can have a shell, let's say I can have a shell in my laptop and connect to my Azure portal through a code. Remember that CLI, our Azure CLI? But in order to make it more simple and having that terminal running on my laptop, you can just simply open a cloud shell here and interactively start to do any changes, development that you want in your Azure using that shell. For example, I have already a machine learning service being created for me before. Let's say I want to delete it. So I can certainly open it and go to click on delete and delete this service. So it can be manual using my mouse and to the portal. But here I can do all those changes using a shell and using an Azure CLI. And because I am opening that shell inside Azure portal, so the Azure CLI is already installed for me. If I'm using my laptop, I have to install Azure CLI first, and then I can see this terminal and I start to interactively work with my Azure using CLI. But to show you that we have already Azure CLI installed, just type AZ, hit enter, and you can see all the component of AZ is already being created for me here. I can do login, AZ login, I can log into my portal, I can connect to my key vault, let's say delete a key vault, create a key vault, create a group. So all these kind of Azure services can be coded, and those kind of configurations can be coded instead of manually doing that in the portal. Well, this AZ command or AZ Azure CLI has multiple extensions, right? So let's see what kind of extensions we have in Azure CLI to use them and work with the services we have in Azure. Well, there's a command here. I have already copied that. AZ extension list. I want to list the available extension and show them as a table to make it more clear to understand. Let me execute. Perfect. These are the extensions that we have already installed. And as you can see, I'm not sure if I have installed the Azure Machine Learning extension or not. Let's say I haven't installed them yet. Okay. So some of the extensions are already being installed here, but some of them like Azure Machine Learning, you need to, for example, install them to be able to connect to your Azure Machine Learning and do configurations based on a CLI code. This is what we need in DevOps, because in DevOps pipeline, we need to code. We cannot be as a human and interactively do the changes and create a compute as an example I showed you, right? So in order to create my ML extension, well, there's a code for that. I have already typed that here, so let me copy that again to save time, and I will paste this here. So AZ extension add Azure CLI for ML. Let me hit enter. Okay, so it's already installed because I was installing that before recording the video. So for you, if you haven't installed, you might see that some installment steps will be happening, and then if you do the AZ again, you should be able to see the Azure Machine Learning as a service that has been added here. Yeah, the ML is already added here, and I can now interact to my Azure Machine Learning through a CLI. The same thing, if you're using your laptop, a bash in your laptop, your PC, the same thing you need to do and install those AZ requirements. Let's see quickly what we can do with Azure Machine Learning extension, CLI extension. So I'm gonna type AZML, hit enter. Oh, okay, there is something wrong with my code. So it is just simply asking me that what you want to do with that AZML extension. So if I just open that, the hint that is given to me, if I open it, this is what you will see. So Here you can see the list of activities you can do using Azure ML extension in CLI as a code actually. So let's say I can create a compute. Remember I told you instead of now manually actually me coming here and create a compute, now I can just code it and do, for example, add the name of the compute that I'm gonna choose, or the configuration, how big and heavy my machine gonna be, what is the memory, what is the number of cores. You can define them all and create. And so many things. You can see the list of that. You can just later on come here and just Google the Azure ML extension. You will actually find the list of the activities or commands you can do using that command line. Awesome. So I just wanted to here let you know more information about what is CLI and why we need it, why we need this as a code when we are working with our Azure DevOps. So this pipeline again is running on an agent, and this agent needs to have the Azure ML extension or Azure CLI being installed to make sure that we can execute those command lines and these AZML stuff. So we need to install that in this compute that my DevOps is running. So let's do it. Let's create a new task. And now we want to work with Azure ML using this pipeline. So I need to add that CLI. The nice thing about classical editors is that those installation and tasks are already being created for you, and you do not need to code from scratch. So I will add Azure CLI, click on it, and we're gonna name it as, well, installing Azure ML CLI, let's say. So I show you how you can install the Azure ML extension in Cloud Shell. We're gonna do the same thing in the agent here. Let's name it to install. Okay, I think I have a space here. No, install Azure ML CLI, and here I need to choose what is the connection type. Remember, we need to connect to my Azure subscription, which is well, here my subscription that I've connected. So that's why we created a service connection in project setting. And if I click on that, I can see my Azure resource connection. Perfect. And a script type. So I'm gonna make it as a shell and a script path. I'm gonna make it inline. I'm gonna write down the code actually here. And this is the code. I copied that before. AZ extension add Azure CLI ML. The same thing that we just ran in the Cloud Shell I just show you. And that's it. So I'm gonna go to the next step. For the next step, what are the best practices of your DevOps pipeline is all about checking to make sure you have what you already expect. For example, I am expecting that I have an Azure Machine Learning Workspace already created in my Azure portal, right? Or my Azure subscription. We know that it's already there, but just in case, it's certainly worth to add it here to create a workspace, just in case if that workspace or deleted or anything happen. So again, for creating a new Azure Machine Learning Workspace, how we can do it? You can guess. So I have already ML CLI. I can code to create a new Azure Machine Learning service. Again, I know we already have it. It's created because we ran our infrastructure as a code pipeline. It gave us the resources we need, but just in case we add it here, and if it's there, it won't fail. It just passed that step. That's it. So how we can do it? Again, I need Azure CLI. Click on it, click on add, and let's actually name it properly. So I click on Azure CLI, and again, the same thing. I want to create the connection to my Azure resource group, a script type, shell, and let's change the name to create Azure ML Workspace. So for creating a new service inside my Azure subscription, I need to be connected to that. And that's why MG credential is being used to connect it to that subscription. And the code here will be inline. Oops, sorry. I have it already, so I just want to copy that and paste the code here, and I will explain what the code is doing. Okay, I copy that, paste it here. Perfect. It is telling me that AZML using that extension we installed here to create a workspace with inside this resource group. Where it's coming from? Well, inside the variables we define in the library. That's why we define those variables before doing anything. The same thing. What is the workspace name? We already have it here. The location, we have it here. And it here is telling that if this workspace already exists, which for us, yes, it exists, we do not need to. Well, okay, just exit. So we're gonna be safe to add it here. Awesome. And we are good to go to the next task. Oh, actually, before going to the next task, I want to check something. I think because we're in a build CI pipeline, we need to define the variable here because we're using classical editor. So whatever we have defined here, I think we need to define these variables. Let me check if they're there or not. Okay, no, they are not being added here. So first, all these variables that we just talked about should be defined here first. Let's do it. I'm gonna click on add. Okay, I have them already here, so I just want to copy them quickly to save time. So the first thing, the resource group that we are going to actually use to create our machine learning workspace insight, that's the variable name, and here's the value of that variable by itself that you already know that. The next thing is my workspace name, so again I copy that here, just paste. And the value would be the name of the workspace that we have. Okay, click on add, and the last one is the location of that workspace. So if we define that variable name as Azure ML location, and the value here, again, just an example, would be Central US. Okay, let me save it, make sure we don't lose it. Click on save. Let's get back to the task. I think now we're good for going to the next task. So what we're gonna do now? Now we have installed Azure ML CLI. We use this to create an Azure ML. And now we certainly need a compute to train a model, right? So we have to create a compute. If it exists, that's fine, it passed. But if it doesn't exist, we need to create a new kind of compute. And we already have the CLI installed, the ML extension, so we can code to create that compute. Awesome. So again, what we need? Another Azure CLI. So click on plus, Azure CLI. I click on add, and let's rename it. I'll rename it as, let's remove. We're gonna create a compute, so we just rename it as is. Oh, sorry. Again, the same thing for resource manager connection. We already have it here. And then the script type here, shell. And again, I just want to type it down here. And I have the code. Let me copy and paste. I'll show you what is happening here. Awesome. This code is a little bit longer, but that's fine. It's not that scary. If we go through that, we're going to understand what is happening. So I'm using Azure ML extension to create a compute, and that ML compute should be inside this resource group. Well, we already added the variable inside that workspace name. We already added, and this is the cluster name. We need to add it in the variable, and then the size. This is the minimum nodes and maximum nodes. Remember, I showed you in the cluster. Now it makes more sense. What does that mean? Again, that was the main reason I showed you in the first video a quick high-level overview about Azure ML. Remember, I showed the clusters, and when we were creating a new one, it was asking me the minimum and maximum requirement of the nodes, right? So that's the same thing that we are doing, but now inside my Azure DevOps pipeline, using that CLI instead of manually doing that in the portal. And the same thing, the ideal seconds before it scaled down, but we need to define these variables, the minimum node, max node, inside the variable. So let's get back and do that quickly. We already defined some of them for the previous task. For the rest, I click on add, and again, the good news is I have them already. So before recording the video, I typed them in a Word file, and I'm just copying them to move them here. So the first thing, my cluster name, I want to call it, let's say, Azure Machine Learning Cluster or AML Cluster. Then I click on add, a new one. What is the next one? The virtual machine or VM size of my cluster. And the value is the standard TS2v2. So what does that mean? Let me quickly show you. If you go back to the compute, create a new one, remember it will ask me the virtual machine type. So CPU, and these are different virtual machines that I can have, and each of them, they have different cores, different kind of RAM. So I'm selecting one of them based on the name to say that, well, this is the machine that I want. So the same thing, DS3 V2. I think I chose DS2. Yes, that's the DS2. So I just wanted to show you what is that name exactly. So what is the next one? The minimum nodes. I want to have 0 minimum nodes because when I'm not using this cluster, I want to fully shut it down to do not pay for anything. That's why it will go all the way down to 0. So let me add 0. And the same thing for the max. I just want to change to max. That's faster. And the maximum node for now, let's add 2. Okay, I just want to make sure that okay, it's correct. And the last thing, the idle seconds before scale down. So after 300 seconds of inactivity, it will scale down to that minimum node. And I want to add the value 300 seconds. All right, so let me save. Perfect, let's get back to our tasks. So we have created the Azure ML just in case if it's not there, and then we create a compute. The next thing is data. And as you can see, the data is already coming for now as a part of my Git. Well, certainly we do not put data in the repo. So repository is just for having some very small data set as an example. For example, here, that's why I added there. And also most of your codes. So where the data is coming from, usually data are already in a storage, like a data lake. And you need to grab the data from there and create a data set or register that data as a data set. Remember, we did it, but we did it manually and uploaded the data from my laptop, and then we created that data set. Let me show you again. So if I go to data set, yes, this is the data set we created and we uploaded from our machine, and you can upload it from GitHub, and you can also create that data set from different storages. So for now, because we are uploading the data, again, real scenarios that rarely happen because we had just an example data to show you, the next task will be uploading the data to my Azure ML and make it as a data set to register that data set. Why? We already did it. We already have that data and we uploaded that from my machine inside my Azure ML. Let's say the answer is our developer changed the code and also changed this data on-prem, on laptop or whatever. And now they did a pull request, the new changes all the way came to my repo. Let me show you in the new tab. And now the changes are here. Not only he has changed the code, but also he modified the initial data. He added more features, for example. So I need to upload that new data and register it in my Azure ML. The same thing we did. But again, DevOps is not a human to come and manually create a data from local file from your repo. So what we should do, we should code it. That's fine. We have the Azure ML CLI. We can code this process as we did for creating that compute. So let's do it. But before doing that, I wanted to describe why we are defining a task and uploading the data. So let's create a new task. And again, I want to work with CLI. Oh, sorry. Click on add and let's rename it to upload data to Datastore, which is that the storage, the default storage I showed you coming with Azure ML. Service connection, we have it here. And let's make the script type shell, and I want to write down the code here. And I have the code. Let me just copy the code and paste it here. Perfect. So let's see what this code is doing. This code is telling me that we are going to upload the data in the data store, which is that default storage, to this machine learning workspace, which is inside this resource group, and inside the data store, the default value, the default data store we have, which is a storage in Azure. And again, these variables, we have already defined them in the variables part. We do not need to do that again. And it's telling me if that insurance data set is already been created, don't worry, just overwrite. or create a new version of that data set. That's why when we see our data set, there's a version. So if there's a change to this, we're going to see that the new versions of that data coming in. This is the beauty of Azure ML, and this is how we can track. Remember again, traceability, one of the best practices of MLOps, one of the actually must that we need to have. So we can trace what changes happen on the top of a data, different versions, and we can have that reproducibility again. We can certainly not have it in on-prem my laptop unless I create a copy of that file and data set and create separate versions of that, which can be a very cumbersome journey, and at some points we're gonna feel we are lost in the middle of nowhere when we're training hundreds of data set and models. Okay, that's it. So let me actually show you the default storage again, just in case if you do not remember previous videos. If we go to Datastore, which is here, we already have a default that comes when we create an Azure Machine Learning. That's the storage behind, that's an Azure blob. And this is the place we are going to upload the data. And let me see if I can open my storage from here. Okay, I need to authenticate. I just want to see the default storage and what is on backend. Perfect, yes, this is the place, and I have containers in my storage, and this is the place that I can put the data here. And I'm telling that upload the new data, that my data scientist push that to the repo, to this path that I'm defining, and call it as a version 2, and if it's there already, override it. Okay, let's get back to my DevOps. And that's it. So let me show you actually the previous data set we uploaded, the insurance data, where exactly is stored inside that storage. So if you want to know, let's get back to our Azure ML, go to the data set. This is the data set we already registered. Just click on that. And you can see the relative path is inside the folder called UI, blah, 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 and then insurance.csv. Let's find it. So this is my default storage come with Azure ML. And if you remember, it's a blob storage. So if I click on the blob store container, that's the UI folder that I just saw that here. UI, and let's continue the rest of the path. UI. And that's the place we uploaded the data. We didn't came here and manually upload. We were actually in Azure Machine Learning, and we just selected from here, I'm gonna upload it there. And on backend, it uploaded there for me. So we're gonna do the same actually. And if it's there, we're gonna override it. Awesome. Okay, before actually continuing the pipeline, let's save it for now and run it and see what's gonna happen. Okay, I think I'm good for now. Save and run. Okay, let's go and see what is happening here. It's gonna again take a while to just make sure that the workspace is there, following the path, create a cluster, and it's gonna take a while. So I'm gonna pause the video and come back shortly as soon as all these steps are done. Awesome. The good news is that all the steps again ran successfully. Let's quickly check it out what happened. We saw that already that we installed all Python requirements, the same thing. We passed the unit test, they were all successful. And we installed the Azure ML CLI successfully. We created an Azure ML Workspace. Well, we didn't because it was already there. So we just passed the steps as we discussed. And then we created a compute cluster, and I think we called it AML compute. It should be written somewhere here. So as a good practice, it's certainly worth. Yeah, see the ML clusters created. Let's go to Azure Machine Learning Studio and see if we successfully created that cluster using a CLI without manually going to the portal. Let's check it out. Let me check. Yes, this is the workspace we are using for this demo. And then let me go to compute, and then I'm gonna click on the compute clusters, and as you can see, awesome, the AML compute cluster is already being created. This is the name that I chose for actually having that compute cluster created for me. And remember, we had the 0 nodes to 2 nodes. That's all being done with the name and the type of the VM that is selected. Without coming here, I created a cluster using CLI in my pipeline. The next thing we did So we uploaded the data to Datastore. We talked about that maybe a new version of the data has been pushed with our developers, data scientists, and they now came to our repo. Let's see how that upload data was successful. And yeah, that's the rest. So before going to see if the data is uploaded and registered as a data set in my Azure ML, let's see the pipeline overall. Okay, that was my pipeline. And as you can see, just 7 minutes ago, I was able to run it successfully. I want to show you something that how I define the path to upload the data. So that was the task. And as you can see, I'm creating a folder called insurance. And inside that, I'm uploading the data. And where's that data? The data is already in my repo that was being pushed by my developer. Let's get back to see if the data is there. I'm in my Azure ML data set. And as you can see, it actually overwrite. Why? Because the data didn't change, and also the same name that we chose to register the data, and we told that if it's going to be a rewrite, that's fine, do it. But this data should be uploaded in an insurance folder inside that data store. Remember? So let's check. I'm gonna open my storage and I'm gonna go to containers, Azure ML Blob Store. Remember, that was the place we uploaded the data manually. But when we upload the data using DevOps and CLI, we told that, hey, create an insurance folder and put it there. So if I go, this is a folder created for me, and inside that, that's the new file or data that we grabbed from the new version that our developers did the push request, and all the way came to my repo, which is actually here, and we call it insurance.csv. Now it is inside my storage, the default storage that my Azure ML can have access to. Alright, that's good for now for this video. And in the next video, we're gonna see how you start training the model, registering, downloading the model, and then publish the artifact, which is gonna be our model, let's say pickle file, to use it to deploy to a staging environment or in a production environment. So stay tuned, and we're gonna see you shortly in the next video. Thank you. Alright, now we saw that how we can interact with our Azure Machine Learning through Azure DevOps. And for the next video, which is number 7, we are going to see how we can start to train our model and start all the way training process. Meanwhile, we are staying in Azure DevOps, but we are interacting with our Azure Machine Learning to continue and finish our CI pipeline. So stay tuned, and we're gonna see each other in the next video.